Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the leader of the new hero squad. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Mizurufu didn't smell like rain anymore. It didn't carry the scent of ozone or wet pavement. It smelled of wet ash, pulverized concrete, and the lingering, copper tang of dried blood. It was a heavy, gray drizzle that seemed to weep from a bruised sky, slicking the ruins of the city in a miserable sheen. Izuku Midoriya sat perched on the exposed rebar of what used to be an office complex. He was 20 stories up, or what was left of the 20th story. His cowl was pulled down, the damp air plastering his unruly green curls to his forehead. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, yet he was seeing everything. Danger sense was quiet. That was the only reason he was sitting down. Below him, the city was a skeleton. The war had ended 6 months ago, but the peace felt less like a victory and more like a coma. Shigaraki and All for One were gone, their legacies of hatred dismantled, but the cost had been catastrophic. The infrastructure of Japan had collapsed. The police force was shattered. The pro-hero rankings were meaningless. The top 10 were either dead, retired due to grievous injury, or had simply quit under the crushing weight of public scrutiny. Society hadn't just broken, it had dissolved. Deku, a voice crackled in his ear. It was low, distorted by the encryption of the comms unit. Report. Izuku touched the earpiece. Sector 4 is quiet, dynamite. No movement in the residential blocks. The looting near the pharmacy has stopped. TCH. It's quiet because everyone's terrified, not because they're safe. Katsuki Bakugo's voice came back, sharp as ever, though stripped of its usual explosive volume. He sounded tired. They all sounded tired. Head back to base. The old man wants a debrief. And, we got a letter. A letter? Official seal. Government courier. Armed escort. The whole circus. Izuku frowned, his green eyes narrowing as he looked toward the horizon where the sun was failing to pierce the smog. The commission? What's left of it? Just get back here. Izuku stood up. The yellow cape on his shoulders, Gran Torino's cape, was tattered at the edges, heavy with rainwater. He didn't jump immediately. He looked down at his hands. They were scarred, crooked, and powerful. They had saved the world, supposedly. But looking at the dark, silent city below, it didn't feel saved. It felt abandoned. He charged one for all, green lightning flickering dimly around his body, and leaped into the gray void. The fortress of Ue. Ue High School was no longer a school. It was a refugee camp turned fortress, the last bastion of true order in the Kanto region. The barrier walls were raised permanently. The pristine glass walkways were now patrolled by drones and the few remaining upperclassmen who hadn't fled the country. Izuku landed in the courtyard, his iron soles crunching on the wet gravel. The atmosphere inside the barrier was suffocatingly tense. Civilians huddled in the designated safe zones, their eyes hollow. They didn't cheer when they saw him. They just stared. The era of celebrity heroes was dead. Now, heroes were just the people who stood between them and the dark. He walked into the Alliance Heights dorms, or the barracks, as they called them now. The common room was stripped of its cozy furniture. Instead, tactical maps were taped to the walls, and crates of rations were stacked in the corner. Class 1A, now Class 3A, was gathered around the central table. They looked older than their years. Shoto Todoroki sat with his back to the wall, nursing a cup of tea, the burned scar on his face seeming more prominent in the harsh fluorescent light. Ochako Uraraka was cleaning her gauntlets, her expression grim. Tenya Ida was pacing, his engines making a low, anxious whirring sound. And there, in the center, was Aizawa. Their teacher was missing a leg, relying on a sleek prosthetic, and the scar over his missing eye was jagged. He sat in a wheelchair, looking at a thick envelope on the table. The stamp on the wax seal was the eagle of the Hero Public Safety Commission. Problem child, Aizawa grunted as Izuku entered. You're late. The roads were blocked, Izuku said, pulling off his mask. What's going on? Bakugo was leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. The vultures are calling in their debts. That's what's going on. Aizawa tapped the envelope. The HPSC has been restructuring. With the resignation of the previous president and the chaos that followed the war, a new interim director has taken control, Director Seiji Shigura. He's a hardliner. Former military intelligence. I've heard the name, Momo Yayorosa said softly. He was an advocate for the Lethal Force Act during the Paranormal Liberation War. He's demanded, an audience, Aizawa said. Specifically with the top combatants of this class. Midoriya, Bakugo, Todoroki, Ida, Uraraka. And me. Why? Izuku asked. Because the police are gone, Todoroki said quietly, his mismatched eyes cold. And the remaining pro-heroes are too scattered to be effective. They need muscle. They don't want heroes, Bakugo spat, pushing off the counter. They want dogs. Izuku looked at the envelope. He felt the phantom throb in his arms, the sensation of danger sense prickling at the back of his skull, not from a villain, but from the piece of paper. When? Izuku asked. Now, Aizawa replied. Transport is waiting at the gate. The bunker, the headquarters of the HPSC, was no longer the gleaming skyscraper in the city center. That had been leveled during the first riots. The new HQ was a subterranean bunker located beneath the ruins of the National Diet Building. The transport ride was silent. The windows were blacked out. Izuku sat across from Bakugo, their knees bumping occasionally as the armored truck navigated the potholes. Neither of them apologized. They were synchronized in their anxiety. When they arrived, they were processed like inmates. Scanners, ID checks, cork dampeners briefly applied and then removed. The air in the bunker was recycled and cold, smelling of antiseptic and fear. They were led into a briefing room that looked more like a war room. A massive holographic map of Japan floated in the center, large swathes of it colored in red. At the head of the table stood Director Shigura. He was a man carved from granite, with graying hair cut strictly close to his skull and eyes that looked like they had seen too much and felt too little. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. Sit, Shigura commanded. They sat. Aizawa wheeled himself to the edge of the table. I won't waste time with pleasantries, Shigura began, his voice rasping like sandpaper. Japan is dying. We are currently operating at 15% grid capacity. Food distribution lines are severed in 3 prefectures. And the villain population, if we can even call them that anymore, has organized into warlord factions. He tapped the table, and the hologram zoomed in on the Kansai region. We have lost Osaka, Shigura stated flatly. The remnants of the Meta Liberation Front have seized the port. They are bringing in black market support gear. If they push east, Tokyo falls. If Tokyo falls, the nation ceases to exist. Izuku gripped his knees. He knew it was bad, but losing Osaka? We are spread too thin, Shigura continued. The current pro-hero model is inefficient. It is reactive. You patrol, you see a crime, you stop it. That worked in peacetime. This is war. We know it's war, Bakugo growled. We fought it. You fought a battle, Shigura corrected sharply. And you survived. But survival isn't victory. We need to reclaim territory. To do that, we need a unified force. No more agencies. No more rankings. No more merchandise. Shigura leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. I am enacting the Emergency Draft Act. As of this moment, UA High is being nationalized. You 5 are the most powerful assets we have. You will be deputized as captains in the new Peacekeeping Corps. The silence in the room was deafening. Peacekeeping Corps? Uraraka asked, her voice trembling slightly. That sounds like the military. It is, Shigura said. You will be given platoons of lower-ranked heroes and police. You will be given targets. You will neutralize those targets. You will secure sectors. Neutralize, Izuku repeated. The word tasted like ash. You mean kill? Shigura looked at Izuku. His gaze was heavy, devoid of the sparkle that All Might used to have. I mean remove the threat. By any means necessary. We do not have the prisons to hold them, Midoriya. Tartarus is gone. The local jails are sieves. If you catch a villain, and you cannot detain them securely, you cannot let them go. So you want executioners, Ida said, standing up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This goes against everything the hero laws stand for. The laws are gone, son. Shigura slammed his fist on the table. The hologram flickered. Wake up. There are no laws in the gray zones. There is only power. You have it. We need it. If you do not use your power to restore order, you are complicit in the chaos. We help people, Izuku said softly. Shigura turned his glare to Izuku. You save individuals. I am trying to save the state. If the state falls, everyone dies. It's a math problem, one for all. And right now, the numbers are against us. He slid 5 dossiers across the table. Sign these. You start tomorrow. Your first mission will be a sweep of the Sedagai Award. We have reports of a villain gang hoarding medical supplies. You will go in, secure the supplies, and eliminate resistance. Eliminate resistance. Izuku looked at the dossier. It looked like a death warrant. Not for him, but for the soul of what a hero was supposed to be. He thought of All Might. He thought of the vestiges inside him. The second user, the leader of the resistance against All for One in the Dark Ages, was whispering in the back of his mind. He's right. War requires blood. But then he heard Yoichi. But peace requires hope. Izuku stood up. Sit down, Midoriya, Shigura warned. No. The word hung in the air. Aizawa watched his student, his face unreadable. I won't sign this, Izuku said, his voice gaining strength. And neither will they. This is not a request, Shigura said, his hand drifting toward a panic button on the table. This is a draft. If you refuse, you will be designated as AWOL. You will be stripped of your licenses. You could be considered hostiles. Then do it, Bakugo said, standing up next to Izuku. Try and arrest us. See how that goes for your grid capacity. Todoroki stood up. Then Uraraka. Then Ida. Shigura narrowed his eyes. You are children playing at gods. You have no plan. You just have morals. Morals don't stop bullets. We have a plan, Izuku lied. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. It was a thought that had been forming in his head for weeks, every time he patrolled the empty streets, every time he saw a pro-hero fail because they were waiting for orders that never came. The military approach won't work, Izuku said, walking to the holographic map. He pointed at the red zones. If you send death squads into these areas, you create martyrs. You radicalize the civilians. You prove the villains right, that we are just oppressors with badges. And your alternative? Shigura sneered. Hugs and rainbows? Autonomy, Izuku said. You want results? You want the sectors cleared? We can do it. But not as your soldiers. Not under your command. He looked at his friends. He saw the trust in their eyes. They didn't know what he was going to say, but they were ready to back it up. We form a specialized unit, Izuku proposed, his mind racing, connecting the dots. A rapid response team. We don't patrol. We don't do PR. We strike high-value targets, we secure logistics, and we dismantle villain networks. But we do it our way. Non-lethal whenever possible. We win the people back, not just the land. A vigilante squad, Shigura scoffed. A vanguard, Izuku corrected. The Vanguard Action Unit? We operate independently of the HPSC bureaucracy. We choose our targets based on need, not politics. And why would I agree to let 5 teenagers run a paramilitary unit inside my country? Because you have no choice, Izuku said coldly. Green electricity sparked around his cowl. You said it yourself? You're losing. The people don't trust the HPSC. But they trust us. They trust the class that defeated Shigaraki. If you declare us enemies, you lose the public forever. If you sanction us, you get to claim our victories. Shigura stared at Izuku. The room was silent for a long time. The director was calculating. He was a pragmatist. He knew he couldn't actually fight Deku and Dynamite right now. He needed them. 1 month, Shigura said. Izuku blinked. What? I give you 30 days. You want to be the vanguard? Fine. You take the Sedagai Award. You clean it up. You secure the supply lines. And you do it without military support. Shigura leaned in close. But if you fail, if you lose a single block, or if the casualty rate exceeds 5%, the deal is void. You submit to the draft, and you follow my orders until the day you die. Do we have an accord? Izuku looked at Bakugo. Bakugo gave a sharp, terrifying grin. He looked at Todoroki, who nodded. He looked at Aizawa. Aizawa let out a long sigh and closed his eyes, a tiny smirk touching his lips. Izuku turned back to the director. We have an accord. The workshop, the ride back to UA was different. The silence wasn't anxious anymore. It was heavy with purpose. You realize you just gambled our entire lives, Bakugo muttered, though there was no heat in it. We were dead anyway if we signed those papers, Izuku replied, staring at his hands. Kaken, I need you to lead the field ops. I can sense danger and I can hit hard, but you know how to move people. You're the best tactician we have. Bakugo stared at him, stunned for a moment. He scoffed, looking away. Took you long enough to admit it, nerd. I'll keep the extras in line. Ida, Izuku continued. We need logistics. Speed is useless if we don't know where we're going. You need to coordinate with the police channels, find the gaps. Understood, Ida said, chopping the air. I will ensure our efficiency is absolute. Uraraka, Todoroki, we need crowd control and rescue. We can't just fight villains. We have to clear the rubble while we fight. That's the difference between us and the soldiers. By the time they reached UA, the sun had set, plunging the campus into darkness, save for the emergency floods. They didn't go to the dorms. They went to the development studio. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a chaotic mess of wires, metal, and explosions. Mei Hatsum was hanging upside down from a ceiling rig, welding a massive gauntlet. Hatsum! Izuku called out. She dropped down, landing in a crouch. Her goggles were covered in soot. Midoriya! I saw the news. Or the lack of news. Are we fleeing the country? I have a jetpack that works 40% of the time. We're not fleeing, Izuku said. He walked over to a workbench and swept a pile of blueprints onto the floor. He grabbed a marker. We're rebranding. Ooh, Hatsum's eyes sparkled. Music to my ears. What do you need? Everything, Izuku said. We're not students anymore. And we're not traditional heroes. We're going into the war zones for weeks at a time. We need durability. We need mobility. And we need to look like a unit. He looked at his costume Gamma. It was destroyed, stitched together, worn out. It looked like a relic of a boy who tried to be All Might. I need something new, Izuku whispered. I can't be the symbol of peace. All Might is gone. I need to be something else. Something that says we are here, not I am here. Hatsum grinned, a manic, brilliant expression. I've got just the babies for you. 7 days later, the deadline was ticking. The HPSC had given them 30 days, but they spent the first week preparing. The media, what was left of it, was buzzing with rumors. Where is Class A? Did they quit? Did the government lock them up? It was a Tuesday night, raining again, when the Vanguard made their debut. The Setagaya Ward was a ghost town of concrete skeletons and flooded streets. A villain gang known as the Razor Chains had taken over a hospital distribution center. They had hostages, nurses, doctors, drivers. Police Captain Sansa Tamakawa was pinned down behind a cruiser, rain pelting his fur. His squad was out of ammo. The villains had quirks that manipulated metal. They had turned the streetlights into spears. Fall back! Sansa yelled into his radio. We can't breach. They have heavy quirks. A spear of twisted metal slammed into the hood of the car, shattering the windshield. Sansa flinched, bracing for the end. Boom! A shockwave rattled the street. But it didn't come from the villains. Sansa looked up. 5 figures stood atop the entrance archway of the distribution center. They were silhouettes against the lightning. The figure in the center stepped forward. He wasn't wearing the bright colors of the past. His suit was a deep, tactical forest green, reinforced with matte black plating on the chest and shins. The bunny-ear cowl was gone, replaced by a streamlined, armored hood and a metallic mouthguard that filtered toxins. A cape, short, tattered, and yellow, snapped in the wind, secured by heavy bolts. The leader raised a hand. Vanguard, the voice was amplified, cutting through the thunder. Engage. An explosion propelled the blonde figure on the right, Bakugo, into the fray with terrifying speed. But it wasn't uncontrolled rage. It was precision. He blasted the metal spears out of the air, creating a smokescreen. Blue fire and ice erupted from the left, Todoroki, creating a barrier that separated the villains from the hostages instantly. A blur of silver, Ida, dashed through the smoke, moving faster than the eye could track, extracting the hostages before the villains even realized they were under attack. And the leader, Izuku Midoriya, didn't run. He launched himself with a burst of black tendrils, Black Whip, that snagged the two largest villains. He yanked them into the air, spinning them disorientingly, and slammed them into the ground with controlled force. Not enough to kill. Enough to end the fight instantly. He landed in the center of the street. The remaining villains hesitated. They looked at this figure, glowing with green energy, steam rising from his armor. Surrender, Izuku commanded. His voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't the voice of a fanboy. It was the voice of a general. Or be removed. The villains dropped their weapons. Sansa Tamakawa stood up slowly. He watched as Uraraka floated the debris away, clearing a path for the ambulances. He watched as the 5 students, no, the 5 heroes, moved with a synergy he had never seen, even in the top 10. Izuku turned to the police captain. The green lenses of his mask glowed in the dark. Sector secure, Captain, Izuku said. Where do you need us next? Sansa swallowed hard. He realized, with a jolt of hope he hadn't felt in a year, that the vacuum left by All Might wasn't empty anymore. The warehouse district, Sansa stammered. But it's heavily guarded. Izuku looked at Bakugo. Bakugo cracked his knuckles. Good, the leader of the vanguard said. We're just getting warmed up. He tapped his comms. Vanguard. Move out. As they vanished into the rain, leaving a secured street and saved lives in their wake, the first camera drone of the night caught the image. It wasn't the symbol of a single man. It was the symbol of a phalanx. The vacuum was filled. And the war for the future had truly began. The adrenaline was a liar. It promised infinite energy, a numbing of pain, and a clarity of mind that made the impossible seem routine. But when the adrenaline faded, it left a debt behind, and the interest rate was brutal. Izuku Midoriya sat on the edge of a cot in the converted gymnasium of UA, staring at his boots. The rubber soles were caked with mud and pulverized drywall from the Setagaya raid. His hands resting on his knees carried a fine tremor. It wasn't fear. It was the biological crash of a body that had channeled the power of a supernova for 3 hours straight. Around him, the squad, though they didn't have a name yet, was in various states of decompression. Tenya Ida was methodically wiping down his engine exhaust pipes with a rag, his movements stiff and mechanical. Shoto Todoroki was pressing a bag of ice against his left side, steam rising faintly from his right shoulder as his body fought to reach thermal equilibrium. Ochako Uraraka lay flat on her back on a yoga mat, staring at the high, steel-beamed ceiling, her chest heaving in slow, deep rhythms to combat the nausea of overuse. And Katsuki Bakugo was pacing. He moved like a caged tiger, back and forth across the polished wood floor. He was still in his gear, the grenade gauntlets clanking softly with every sharp turn. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the air, replays of the battle likely running through his mind. We were slow, Bakugo muttered, the silence of the gym amplifying his gravelly voice. We secured the objective in 18 minutes, Bakugo, Ida corrected, adjusting his glasses. The HPSC estimated a 40-minute engagement for a SWAT team. We performed at double efficiency. 18 minutes is an eternity when you're outnumbered 50-1, Bakugo snapped, spinning on his heel. We got lucky. Those villains were D-listers. Razor chains? Please, they were thugs with delusions of grandeur. If that had been a coordinated Noma strike, or if the remnants of the PLF had actual command structure, we'd be dead. He's right, Izuku said softly. The room went quiet. When Izuku spoke these days, the air seemed to grow heavier. He looked up, his eyes dark and encircled by shadows. We relied on brute force, Izuku continued, analyzing the air as if the battle data were scrolling before him. I used Black Whip to breach. Shoto used a wide-area ice wall to separate the hostages. It worked, but it burned 30% of our stamina in the first 3 minutes. We can't sustain that. Not if we're going to be doing this every night for a month. Uraraka sat up, wincing as she rubbed her temples. So, what's the alternative, Deku? We can't hold back. If we hold back, people get hurt. Not holding back, Izuku clarified. Efficiency. Synergy. Right now, we're 5 strong heroes fighting in the same room. We need to be one unit fighting with 5 bodies. The gymnasium doors creaked open. Aizawa rolled in, the rubber wheels of his chair squeaking on the floor. He looked more tired than all of them combined, a man holding up the sky with one arm. The director is pleased, Aizawa deadpanned. Or as pleased as a man like Shigura can be. He's counting the Setagaya raid as a proof of concept. But he's already lining up the next 3 targets. 3? Todoroki asked, frowning. A fuel depot in Chiba. A villain stronghold in the abandoned subway lines of Roppongi. And an escort mission for a convoy of quirk-suppressing cuffs coming from overseas. Aizawa listed them off. He expects you to handle all 3 within the week. That's insane, Uraraka whispered. It's war, Aizawa corrected. But Midoriya is right. I watched the drone feeds. You're sloppy. Powerful, but sloppy. You're fighting like students trying to pass an exam, looking for the correct answer. There are no answers anymore. There are only outcomes. Aizawa tossed the tablet onto Izuku's lap. You have autonomy. That was the deal. If you want to survive the week, you need to stop acting like Class 1A and start acting like a paramilitary unit. Build your team. Define your roles. Fix your gear. Aizawa turned his wheelchair around. I've cleared the development studio. Hatsum has been waiting. I suggest you go before she starts taking the building apart. The forge. The development studio smelled of ozone, burnt coffee, and hot grease. It was a chaotic sanctuary, a jungle of hanging wires, half-assembled exosuits, and blueprints plastered over every vertical surface. Mei Hatsum did not sleep. Izuku was fairly certain she didn't even blink. When the 5 of them walked in, she was standing on top of a workbench, wielding a blowtorch like a conductor's baton. She cut the flame the moment they entered, pulling up her goggles to reveal manic, crosshair-pupiled eyes. The guinea pig's return. She cheered, jumping down with a heavy thud. I saw the footage. Terrible. Absolute garbage. Who designed your compression bracers, Midoriya? A toddler? I saw the microfractures in the plating from a mile away. That's why we're here, Hatsum, Izuku said, walking over to a central table cleared of debris. We need upgrades. Specific ones? I don't do upgrades, Hatsum scoffed, grabbing a tablet and typing furiously. I do evolutions. Tell me what you need, and I'll tell you why you're wrong and give you something better. Izuku took a deep breath. This was the first step of leadership, knowing what his people needed before they knew it themselves. Ida, Izuku started, pointing to the speedster. He's our rapid response and extraction. But his engines are overheating in the sustained combat zones because the air intake is clogged with debris and ash. He needs filtration and a liquid cooling radiator system, not just air cooling. Hatsum nodded, typing. Doable. I can retrofit the radiator from a heavy-duty loader bot. It'll add weight, but the torque increase will offset it. Uraraka, Izuku continued. Her nausea limit is the bottleneck. But more importantly, her mobility relies on touching things. In open areas, she's grounded. I want her to have grappling cables. Like mine, like Aizawa-sensei's. Retractable wire spools built into her gauntlets. If she can make herself weightless and pull herself through the air, she becomes an aerial drone. Wire-guided flight, Hatsum muttered, drooling slightly. I can use carbon nanotube weaves. High tensile strength. Todoroki, Izuku moved down the line. He has the raw power, but he lacks precision in close quarters without risking friendly fire. He needs a regulator, something that allows him to channel his fire and ice into concentrated beams rather than waves. And thermal insulation for his teammates. If he goes 100%, we shouldn't have to retreat from the heat. Variable nozzle gauntlets, Hatsum said. And I can weave heat-resistant fibers into all your suits. Easy. And Bakugo? Hatsum looked at the explosive blonde. Bakugo bristled. I don't need your trash. My gear works. Your gauntlets store sweat, Izuku interrupted. But they have a charge time. In an ambush, you're vulnerable for the first 90 seconds while you work up a sweat. You need an external ignition source. A primer. Something to heat your palms instantly so you can fire at max power from 0 seconds. Bakugo opened his mouth to argue, paused, and then clicked his teeth. Fine. But make it sleek. I'm not wearing a toaster on my hands. And you? Hatsum pointed a wrench at Izuku. The leader. The big green. Izuku looked down at his scarred arms. I need armor. Real armor. I can't dodge everything anymore. If I'm coordinating the team, I have to be the anchor. I need to be able to take a hit from a high-end Nomu and stay standing. And I need comms. A localized battle network that connects my danger sense to their HUDs. Hatsum froze. The playfulness vanished from her face for a split second, replaced by pure engineering awe. You want to hardwire your quirk into their earpieces? I want them to know when to dodge before I even say a word, Izuku said. Can you do it? Hatsum grinned, a terrifying expression that promised sleepless nights and explosions. Baby, I can do anything. She clapped her hands. Strip! Leave your suits here. Come back in 12 hours. And bring coffee. The black kind. The kind that kills a normal man. The Clash. They didn't sleep. The adrenaline had faded, but the mind was still racing. Bakugo found Izuku on the roof of the Alliance Heights dorms. It was 3 a.m. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air cold and crisp. The clouds had parted enough to show a sliver of a waning moon. Izuku was leaning against the railing, looking out at the dark expanse of the city beyond the barrier. He was wearing a plain t-shirt and track pants, shivering slightly, though he didn't seem to notice. Bakugo kicked the door open but didn't stomp. He walked over and leaned against the railing next to Izuku, keeping a foot of distance between them. You're twitching, Bakugo said. I'm thinking, Izuku replied. You're overthinking. That's your quirk. Overthinking for all. Izuku managed a weak smile. We got lucky, Kaken. You said it yourself? Yeah. We did. Bakugo turned, leaning his back against the railing so he could look at Izuku. And you know why? Because you're trying to play two roles at once. Izuku looked up. What do you mean? You're trying to be the general and the tank, Bakugo said, his voice low but sharp. In the raid, you broke formation 3 times. Once to save that nurse, once to intercept a pipe thrown at Round Face, and once to finish the boss. I had to save them, Izuku defended. Did you? Bakugo challenged. Uraraka saw the pipe. She was moving to dodge. You interfered. You wasted energy covering for people who can cover themselves. I can't take that risk, Kaken. If I see danger, I move. That's who I am. That's who you were. Bakugo shoved off the railing, stepping into Izuku's space. You're not the vigilante running around in mud anymore. You're the leader of this squad. If you jump in front of every bullet meant for us, you're going to go down. And if you go down, the command structure collapses, and then we all die. Bakugo poked a finger hard into Izuku's chest. You have a savior complex the size of a planet. But right now, that complex is a liability. You have to trust us to bleed a little. You have to trust us to take a hit. Izuku swatted Bakugo's hand away. I promised All Might I wouldn't let the world break. How can I lead if I'm hiding behind you? It's not hiding. Bakugo shouted, the explosion of noise startling a crow from a nearby tree. It's delegating. Do you think All Might fought every villain in every battle? No. He hit the big bad. He let the sidekicks handle the trash. But you want to save everyone, defeat everyone, and be everywhere. Bakugo grabbed Izuku by the collar of his shirt. Listen to me, Deku. You chose this team. You chose me. You chose Icy Hot. Are we weak? Izuku's eyes widened. No. Of course not. Then let us fight. Bakugo released him, shoving him back slightly. Stop trying to be the shield and the sword. Be the brain. Use your danger sense to tell me where to shoot, not to run over and block the shot with your face. You're not expendable anymore. You're the king piece. If the king falls, it's checkmate. Izuku stared at Bakugo. He saw the frustration in his childhood friend's eyes, but underneath it, he saw the fear. Bakugo wasn't angry that Izuku was stealing glory. He was terrified that Izuku was going to kill himself trying to be a god. Izuku slumped, the tension leaving his shoulders. I don't know how to turn it off. The need to move. When I feel the danger, then don't turn it off, Bakugo grunted, crossing his arms. Redirect it. When you feel the buzz, bark an order. Dodge left. Duck. Blast at 3 o'clock. Make us your limbs. That's what a vanguard is. We clear the path. You walk it. Izuku looked at his hands. He imagined the threads of one for all, not just connecting the past users, but connecting him to the 4 people downstairs. The vanguard isn't about me, is it? Izuku whispered. Finally, Bakugo huffed. The nerd gets it. It's about the unit. We aren't all might. We can't be one pillar. We have to be a foundation. Bakugo turned to leave, his cape swirling in the night breeze. He stopped at the door. Fix your head, Deku. Hatsum can fix the suit, but only you can fix the wiring up there. Tomorrow we start drilling. And I'm not going easy on you. Kaken, Izuku called out. Bakugo paused. Thank you? Shut up. Don't die. The door slammed. Izuku stood alone on the roof, but for the first time in months, the crushing weight of the world felt distributed. Divided by 5. The assembly. The next morning, the gymnasium had been transformed. Hatsum had delivered. 5 mannequins stood in the center of the room, each donning the new Vanguard protocol suits. They weren't just costumes, they were uniforms. They shared a design language, utilitarian, armored, darker tones suitable for night ops and urban warfare, but retaining the signature colors of each hero. Hatsum stood by the display, vibrating with caffeine and pride. Behold! The V-Series Mark I. They suited up in silence. The weight of the gear was different. It felt serious. Izuku's suit, Vanguard Alpha. The green was darker, almost black in low light. The chest plate was reinforced with a ceramic alloy weave to absorb kinetic impact. The boots were heavier, equipped with magnetic clamps for stability. The yellow cape was there, but it was shorter, weighted at the hem to prevent tangling. The most striking change was the cowl. It was rigid, integrating a full-face HUD and a voice modulator. Bakugo's suit, Vanguard Bravo, gone were the massive, flared fin masks. He wore a streamlined tactical headset. His chest was covered in a reactive vest that fed heat into the gauntlets. The gauntlets themselves were slimmer, denser, looking more like heavy artillery cannons than grenades. He had ammo belts of AP shot canisters strapped across his chest. Todoroki's suit, Vanguard Charlie, a high-collar coat made of a temperature-regulating smart fabric that shifted color from white to deep red depending on his heat output. He wore a utility belt filled with medical supplies and flashbangs. His boots were spiked for ice traction. Ida's suit, Vanguard Delta, he looked like a tank. His armor was thicker, aerodynamic but bulky. The radiators on his engines were exposed, glowing with a soft blue light. He had retractable stabilizers on his forearms to shield civilians during extraction. Uraraka's suit, Vanguard Echo, sleek, pink and black. The bulkiness of her old suit was gone, replaced by a skin-tight pressure suit designed for high-G maneuvers. On her forearms were the grappling rigs, heavy, industrial spools of wire. Her boots had thrusters, not for flight, but for course correction in 0G. Systems check, Izuku said. His voice, modulated by the mask, sounded deeper, stripped of doubt. Green across the board, Hatsum chirped from a laptop nearby. Comms are live. Danger sense integration is experimental, but active. When Midoriya clenches his jaw, the signal broadcasts. All right, Izuku turned to his team. They looked like soldiers. They looked like heroes. We have the gear. Now we need the synergy. He pointed to the far end of the gym, where Cementos had erected a complex maze of concrete pillars and barriers. Ectoplasm stood on a high platform, ready to spawn clones. Scenario: hostile extraction, Izuku barked. Objective: reach the target at the back of the maze. Heavy resistance. No stopping. No individual fights. Ready, Bakugo growled, sparking his palms. Engage. They moved. But this time, it wasn't a race. As they charged the maze, Ectoplasm released 30 clones. They flooded the corridor, firing quirk-generated sludge bullets. Contact front! Bakugo yelled. Izuku felt the buzz. Danger from the right flank. Right side. Wall breach. Izuku commanded instantly. He didn't move to block it. He trusted. Todoroki didn't hesitate. He slammed his right hand forward. A glacier of ice surged out, sealing the right corridor instantly, blocking the ambush before it happened. Clear! Todoroki shouted. Ida, suppressive run! Izuku ordered. Ida revved his engines. Recipro turbo. He became a blur, dashing straight through the center of the enemy formation. He didn't stop to hit them. The shockwave of his passing knocked them off balance. Uraraka, Bakugo. Skyline. Uraraka tapped her chest, floating herself. She fired her grapple wires, latching onto Bakugo's shoulders. Bakugo grinned. Die. He launched himself into the air with an explosion. Because Uraraka was weightless, she trailed behind him like a kite. As they flew over the disoriented clones, Uraraka released the gravity on a handful of heavy debris she had collected in her pockets. Comet rain! She yelled, releasing the debris. Bakugo blasted the falling rocks with an AP shot. The debris shattered into shrapnel, raining down on the clones and suppressing them completely. Izuku moved through the chaos. He was the eye of the storm. He wasn't hitting anyone. He was watching. Danger. Sniper. High left. Sniper! 12 o'clock high. Shoto. Todoroki looked up. He couldn't see the sniper, but he trusted the call. He fired a precision beam of fire. The ectoplasm clone on the high rafter dissolved before it could fire. They reached the back of the maze in 40 seconds. They stood together, chests heaving, steam rising from their suits. Ectoplasm clapped slowly from his perch. Impressive. You didn't stop moving once. Izuku looked at his team. Bakugo was smirking. Uraraka was beaming, retracting her wires. Ida was checking his coolant levels. Todoroki was cooling off his left side. We can go faster, Izuku said, but there was pride in his voice. Damn straight we can, Bakugo agreed. The name. Later that evening, they sat in a common room. It was the first time they had eaten a meal together without staring at a map or a dossier. The HPSC is asking for a name, Momiji Yoroza said. She had taken on the role of their operations manager, handling the paperwork that Director Shigura sent over. They want to brand you, the new top 5 or the Alpha Squad. Something marketable. No, Izuku said, taking a bite of rice. We aren't a brand. We need a name that tells them what we are, Ida said. We are the first line of defense. The ones who go where others cannot. The Vanguard, Todoroki said. Midoriya said it before. The Vanguard Action Unit, Bakugo mused. Sounds a bit like the villains, doesn't it? The Vanguard Action Squad? That's the point, Izuku said. He looked at his friends. The villains think they are the ones changing the world. They think they're the revolution. We need to take that language back. We are the vanguard of the new era. We're the ones clearing the rubble so the builders can come in behind us. The vanguard, Uraraka tested the word. I like it. It sounds forward. Not defensive. It's settled then, Momo said, typing it into the official registration form. Unit name, the Vanguard. Leader, Izuku Midoriya. Field Commander, Bakugo corrected without looking up from his bowl. Deku is the strategist. I call the shots when bullets start flying, Momo smiled. Noted. Field Commander, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku looked around the table. For a moment, the war outside felt far away. They were just students again, but looking at the scars on their arms, the hardness in their eyes, he knew that part of their lives was over. They were soldiers now. But they were soldiers who had chosen their own war. The Shadow. Location. HPSC Bunker Director's Office. Director Shigura watched the footage of the training session on his monitor. He watched the way Midoriya commanded the unit. He watched the lethal efficiency of Bakugo and Todoroki. He took a drag of his cigarette. Sir, an aide stepped out of the shadows. The hero public approval rating has risen 4% since the Setagaya raid. The public is responding to them. Of course they are, Shigura muttered. People love a savior. Especially a young, tragic one. Do we proceed with the integration? No, Shigura said, exhaling a plume of smoke. Not yet. Let them have their autonomy. Let them think they're free. The more success they have, the more dependent the public becomes on them. And once they are indispensable, Shigura tapped a file on his desk. It was labeled Project Silence. Once they are indispensable, we tighten the leash. Or we cut it. He looked at the screen, freezing the image on Izuku's glowing green eyes. Enjoy your vanguard, Midoriya, Shigura whispered. But remember, the vanguard is also the first to die. The call. Back at the dorms, the alarm klaxon shattered the peace. Red lights strobed in the hallway. All hands. Momo's voice came over the intercom, urgent and terrified. Priority 1 alert. We have a massive energy spike in the Shinjuku ruins. Satellite thermal shows extensive fires. Izuku was up before the announcement ended. He met Bakugo in the hallway. They didn't speak. They just ran to the launch bay. What is it? Uraraka asked, sliding down the banister, already pulling on her cowl. Momo's voice came back, trembling. It's not a villain gang. It's the sensors are reading multiple high-end signatures. And they're moving toward the refugee centers. Izuku felt the cold grip of danger sense clench his entire skull. It wasn't just danger. It was malice. Pure, unadulterated malice. He looked at his team. Helmets on, Izuku ordered. We drop in 5. Vanguard. Bakugo shouted. Plus Ultra. They responded in unison. The bay doors opened to the night. They leaped into the darkness, leaving the safety of the school behind. The assembly was over. The war had truly begun. The night sky over Shinjuku was not black. It was a bruised, sickly orange, reflecting the inferno raging below. Inside the transport dropship, a sleek, angular craft Mei Hatsum had lovingly christened the Icarus II. The air was pressurized and silent. The hum of the engines was a vibration in the bones rather than a sound. Izuku Midoriya sat strapped into the command chair near the cockpit. His eyes were closed. His new cowl was pulled up, the metallic mouth guard locked into place, but the HUD inside his visor was currently dark. He didn't need technology to see what was coming. Danger sense was screaming. It wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of a direct attack. It was a dull, overwhelming roar, like standing under a waterfall of malice. Thousands of people in panic. Hundreds of people with intent to harm. It washed over him, threatening to drown his thoughts in a sea of anxiety. He clenched his gloved hands, grounding himself against the armrests. Filter it, he told himself. Don't feel it. Read it. 2 minutes to drop zone. Tenya Ida's voice cut through the static, calm and professional. Ida was piloting. Thermal scans indicate the fire has breached the perimeter of the refugee zone 4. The structural integrity of the west barricade is failing. Enemies? Katsuki Bakugo asked. He was standing by the open bay door, holding a strap with one hand, his other hand flexing inside his new heavy-impact gauntlet. Heat signatures are clustered, Ida reported. Estimating 300 hostiles. They aren't looting. They're swarming. Regiment 9, Shoto Todoroki said, adjusting the cooling vents on his collar. Remnants of the Meta-Liberation Front. They believe the refugee camps are cages for the weak. They want to liberate the civilians by destroying the shelter. They're going to massacre them, Ochako Uraraka whispered, checking the wire spools on her wrists. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. Izuku opened his eyes. The green lenses of his mask flared to life. No, Izuku said. His voice was modulated, stripping away the nervous tremble of the boy he used to be. They aren't going to touch a single one. He stood up, the magnetic locks of his boots disengaging with a hiss. Listen up, Izuku commanded. The team looked at him. There was no hesitation in their gaze. This isn't a brawl. It's a surgical operation. The objective is protection, not pursuit. If they run, let them run. We hold the line. He tapped the side of his helmet. Link up. Protocol Alpha. A chime sounded in all 5 of their headsets. A complex web of data streams appeared in their peripheral vision, heart rates, positions, ammunition counts, and at the center of the display, a green waveform that pulsed in rhythm with Izuku's own quirk. I will be the eyes, Izuku said. Trust the voice in your ear. If I say move, you move. If I say strike, you strike. Just don't get a headache, nerd, Bakugo grunted, pulling his goggles down. We drop in 10. The bay door hissed fully open. The wind roared in, carrying the smell of burning plastic and despair. Vanguard, Izuku shouted over the wind. Drop. The descent. Refugee Zone 4 was a nightmare. It had been a stadium once. Now, it was a tent city packed with 10,000 displaced civilians. The massive concrete walls that had been erected to protect them were being battered by quirks, explosions, acid, sonic waves. On the ground, a volunteer militia armed with riot shields was buckling. A villain with a mutation quirk that turned his skin into jagged rock was leading the charge, smashing through a guard tower. Liberation! The rock villain roared, raising a massive fist to crush a militia officer cowering in the mud. Cast off your shackles. The fist descended. It never landed. A streak of green lightning tore through the smoke from the sky. Smash! The impact shook the ground for 3 blocks. A crater formed in the asphalt. In the center of the dust cloud, Izuku Midoriya stood over the militia officer. He hadn't punched the villain. He had caught the villain's fist with one hand. The rock villain's eyes widened. What? You're trespassing, Izuku said. Before the villain could react, an explosion hit him from the right flank. Bakugo landed with the force of a missile, blasting the rock villain sideways into a concrete pillar. Eyes up, trash! Bakugo yelled, smoke curling from his gauntlets. Simultaneously, 3 other figures landed on the perimeter wall. Todoroki slammed his right hand onto the concrete. A massive glacier of ice surged down the wall, creating a rampart that sealed the breach the villains had made. Uraraka and Ida hit the ground running. Civilian extraction team, move to the center. Ida projected his voice, his engines revving to a high-pitched whine. Stay behind the vanguard line. The battlefield froze for a split second. The villains, a chaotic mix of zealots and opportunists, stared at the 5 armored figures. They didn't look like the pro-heroes of the past, with their bright colors and smiles. They looked like a paramilitary strike force. Kill them! A villain with laser eyes screamed. They're just kids, the mob charged. The conductor, Izuku, didn't move forward. He leaped backward, landing on top of a flipped transport truck. This was his vantage point. He closed his eyes. Danger sense flooded him. Attack coming from the left. Fire quirk. Low trajectory. Attack from the right. Sniper. High velocity. Attack from the center. Brute force. The information was agonizing, 1,000 needles pricking his brain. He gritted his teeth, forcing the pain into data. He synthesized it. He transmitted it. Bakugo. 9 o'clock, low. Blast shield. Bakugo didn't look. He trusted the call instantly. He swung his left gauntlet down, firing an explosion into the ground. The force kicked up a wall of dirt and debris just as a stream of blue fire washed over where he had been standing. The fire deflected harmlessly off the dirt wall. Todoroki. 2 o'clock. Sniper on the roof. Flash freeze. Todoroki, currently engaging a group of melee fighters, snapped his head up. He couldn't see the sniper through the smoke. He fired anyway. A pillar of ice shot up the side of a building, encasing the sniper before he could pull the trigger. Ida? Sector 3. Debris falling on civilians. Ida broke off his engagement. Recipro burst. He vanished. A split second later, he appeared under a crumbling section of the stadium overhang. He caught a slab of concrete that weighed 2 tons, his engine screaming as he braced the weight. Uraraka! Assist Ida! Izuku commanded. On it! Uraraka launched herself using her grapple wires, swinging through the chaos. She tapped the concrete slab Ida was holding. Release! The slab became weightless. Ida spun, throwing the massive rock like a frisbee back toward the villain line. Bakugo! Detonate the debris! With pleasure! Bakugo aimed his AP shot at the flying slab. Boom! The concrete shattered in midair, raining shrapnel down on the advancing villain horde, forcing them to take cover. Izuku stood on the truck, his hands moving like a conductor leading a symphony of violence. He wasn't fighting a single opponent. He was fighting the entire battlefield. Danger! Behind me. Izuku ducked. A blade of wind sliced the air where his neck had been. He didn't counterattack. Shoto! My 6! Trap him! Todoroki spun around, sliding on an ice path. He stomped the ground, sending a wave of ice spikes toward the truck. The windquirk villain, who thought he had the drop on the leader, was suddenly caged in a prison of ice. Too slow, Todoroki muttered. Izuku tapped his comms. Phase 1 complete. Perimeter is stabilized. They're regrouping for a heavy push. Prepare for combo sequence beta. The synergy. The villains were disoriented. They were used to fighting heroes who grandstand, who announced their attacks, who fought in isolated duels. They weren't used to a hive mind. What is this? The laser villain shouted, taking cover behind a car. They're everywhere. Push them. A large, mutant villain roared. There's only 5 of them. Swarm them. The villains surged again, this time abandoning tactics for sheer weight of numbers. A wave of 200 bodies crashed toward the ice wall. They're trying to overwhelm us. Momo Yaoyoro's voice came over the global comms channel from Ye. Midoriya, satellite shows a second wave coming from the south. You need to end this now. Copy that, Izuku said. He looked down at his team. They were positioned in a wedge formation. Bakugo at the point. Todoroki and Ida on the flanks. Uraraka in the center, acting as the pivot. Vanguard, Izuku said calmly. Clear the board. Roger. The sequence began. Combo move, the gravity well. Uraraka clasped her hands together. Releasing now, she touched the ground. But she wasn't floating herself. She was channeling her quirk through the grapple wires she had scattered across the battlefield during the initial skirmish. She had attached them to loose cars, dumpsters, and massive chunks of concrete. Everything floated. Hundreds of tons of debris lifted into the air, creating a floating minefield above the charging villains. Ida! Cyclone! Ida sprinted in a tight circle underneath the floating debris. He moved so fast he created a vortex, a vacuum that sucked the floating objects, and the lighter villains, into a chaotic spin. Shoto! Heat wave! Todoroki switched to his left side. He didn't fire. He simply released pure heat. The air inside the vortex superheated instantly. The sudden pressure change disoriented the villains, making them dizzy and sluggish. Kaken, Izuku said. Thunderclap. Bakugo grinned. He jumped into the center of Ida's vortex, spinning with the momentum. He held his hands out, palms facing opposite directions. Stun grenade. Max. A blinding flash of light and a concussion wave of sound erupted from the center of the storm. It wasn't a lethal explosion. It was a sensory overload. The combined force of the wind, the heat, and the flashbang knocked every single villain in the front wave unconscious. They dropped like puppets with their strings cut. The battlefield fell silent, save for the ringing in everyone's ears. Izuku jumped down from the truck. He walked through the smoke, his cape billowing. The remaining villains in the back, the ones who hadn't been caught in the combo, looked at the pile of unconscious bodies. They looked at the 5 heroes standing untouched. They dropped their weapons. Sector 4 secure, Izuku said into his comms. But danger sense didn't stop. In fact, it spiked. The Titan, the ground shook. Not from an explosion, but from a footstep. From the burning ruins of the stadium entrance, a figure emerged. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall. It had dark, purple skin, exposed muscle fibers, and a beak-like mouth. But unlike the mindless Nomu of the past, this one wore armor. Plating was bolted directly into its flesh, and it had a harness with a rider. Strapped to the Nomu's back was a man in a white suit, wearing a mask with the Meta Liberation symbol. Impressive, the rider's voice was amplified by speakers. Truly impressive. The HPSC's new dogs have teeth. High-end? Bakugo asked, tense. No, Izuku analyzed. It doesn't feel like a high-end. It lacks the intelligence. But the power, it's dense. It's a walking bomb. I am Commander Redestro's legacy. The rider shouted. If we cannot have this city, no one can. The Nomu opened its mouth. Energy began to gather, a swirling ball of purple and black plasma. He's aiming for the shelter supports. Ida yelled. If that beam hits the main pillar, the stadium roof collapses on the refugees. We have to intercept. Uraraka screamed. Too far. Todoroki shouted, raising an ice wall. My ice won't hold that kind of energy. Izuku felt the intent. It was absolute destruction. Bakugo, Todoroki, shield the civilians. Izuku ordered. What about you? Bakugo yelled. I'm going to catch it. Deku, you idiot, that's suicide. Izuku didn't listen. He channeled one for all. Full cowl. 45%. Then he added FA gene. He began to crouch, building up kinetic energy, layering it, compressing it. Smokescreen. He released a burst of purple smoke, blinding the Noma's aim for a split second. The Noma fired. The beam was devastating. It tore through the asphalt, vaporizing everything in its path. It was heading straight for the central pillar. Izuku launched himself. He didn't attack the Noma. He attacked the beam. Detroit smash. He hit the energy beam from the side. The force of his punch collided with the plasma. It was a contest of raw power. Izuku's muscles screamed. The heat was searing his suit. It's too heavy. I can't deflect at all. He felt his bones creaking. The beam was pushing him back. Suddenly a hand grabbed his belt. Don't hog the glory, nerd. Bakugo was there. He jammed his gauntlet right into the beam's path alongside Izuku. Howitzer. Impact. Bakugo fired a concentrated explosion into the plasma beam, disrupting its cohesion. Then, a wall of ice slammed into Izuku's back, bracing him. Todoroki was behind them, anchoring them to the ground. Push it! Todoroki yelled. Ida and Uraraka were there too. Uraraka slapped Izuku and Bakugo, making them weightless so the recoil wouldn't crush their legs. Ida grabbed Todoroki's waist, revving his engines to provide forward thrust to the whole human chain. Vanguard! Izuku screamed, his eyes glowing white. United! Rejection! Izuku and Bakugo pushed in unison. The combined force of one for all and the explosion directed by the support of the others shattered the plasma beam. It refracted, shooting harmlessly into the sky, where it exploded like fireworks. The feedback knocked them all backward. The Noma staggered, exhausted by the discharge. Izuku landed in a crouch, smoke rising from his armor. His right arm was bruised, the sleeve of his suit torn, but not broken. He looked at the Noma. The rider looked terrified. Checkmate, Izuku whispered. He vanished. Using the speed of gearshift, he closed the distance instantly. He appeared above the Noma. Black whip! Black tendrils shot out, wrapping around the Noma's limbs and the rider. Izuku spun in midair, using the momentum to slam the massive beast face first into the ground. Crash! The Noma lay still. The rider groaned, unconscious. Izuku landed on the Noma's back. He stood up, breathing heavily. Silence returned to Shinjuku, the face of peace. The rain began to fall again. It sizzled on the hot pavement, turning the battlefield into a mist-covered dreamscape. The refugees began to emerge from the tents. Thousands of them. They looked at the unconscious villains piled in the mud. They looked at the massive defeated beast, and they looked at the 5 figures standing in the center of it all. A little girl, no older than 6, broke away from her mother. She walked toward Izuku. Hey! A militia man warned. Careful! Izuku knelt down. His armor was scorched. His cape was torn in half. He looked terrifying, a dark, armored soldier. The girl stopped a few feet away. She pointed at his mask. Are you All Might? She asked. Izuku reached up. With a hiss of depressurization, he unlocked his helmet. He pulled it off, shaking his damp green curls free. He revealed his face, young, scarred, covered in soot, but human. He offered a tired, gentle smile. No, Izuku said softly. All Might is retired. He gestured to the 4 people standing behind him. Bakugo, wiping dirt off his cheek. Todoroki, exhaling a puff of cold air. Uraraka, retracting her wires with a weary grin. Ida, checking the girl's mother for injuries. We're the vanguard, Izuku said. And we're here to make sure you can sleep tonight. The girl stared at him. Then she smiled. Thank you, Mr. Vanguard. A cheer started low in the crowd, then swelled. It wasn't the hysterical cheering of the old days. It was deeper. It was the sound of relief. It was the sound of people realizing they hadn't been forgotten. Midoriya, Bakugo walked over, limping slightly. Police transport is inbound. The containment units are ready for the prisoners. Casualties? Izuku asked, his voice tight. 0, Bakugo said. He looked at Izuku, and for the first time in a long time, there was genuine respect in his eyes. Civilian casualties are 0. Team injuries, minor. Izuku let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a year. He slumped slightly, the exhaustion finally hitting him. Good work, Kaken. Don't get used to it, Bakugo muttered, though he offered Izuku a hand to pull him up. The aftermath. HPSC bunker monitor room. Director Shigura stared at the screen. The drone feed showed the Vanguard standing amidst the cheering crowd. The image was striking, a tableau of the new era. Sir, the aide said, voice trembling. Social media is exploding. The hashtag The Vanguard is trending worldwide. People are calling them the Iron Wall. Approval ratings for the draft act just jumped 15%. Shigura didn't smile. He tapped the desk. They did too well, Shigura murmured. Sir, they were supposed to struggle. They were supposed to need our support units. If they can handle a regiment-level threat and a Noma on their own, then they don't need us. Shigura picked up his phone. He dialed a number. This is Director Shigura. Initiate Phase 2 of the media campaign. I want the narrative controlled. Midoriya isn't the leader. The government is the leader. Midoriya is just the weapon. Make sure the news anchors emphasize that they were following orders. He hung up. You won the battle, Midoriya, Shigura said to the screen. But let's see how you handle the peace. The vestiges. Back at UA, in the quiet of the locker room, the team was changing out of their damaged suits. My radiator is shot, Ida lamented, inspecting a cracked pipe on his armor. I pushed the RPM too high. My wires fused, Uraraka said, looking at her gauntlets. But it worked. That combo worked. We need to refine the timing, Todoroki critiqued, applying a burn cream to his neck. The heat wave was a second late. If Bakugo hadn't detonated, the villains might have recovered. I wasn't late, you were early, icy hot, Bakugo snapped from the bench, though he was busy bandaging his wrist. Izuku sat in the corner, holding his helmet. He was staring into the black visor. He felt a tug in his mind. He closed his eyes for a second and found himself in the vestige world. Yoichi was there. And the second user. You commanded the field well. The second user said, his arms crossed. You used the others as extensions of your will. That is how a rebellion is fought. But he protected them too, Yoichi added gently. He didn't sacrifice them, for now. The second user warned. But the enemies will adapt. They know your tactics now. Next time, they won't group up to be hit by an area of effect attack. Next time, they will isolate you. Are you ready to make the hard choice when the perfect victory isn't possible? Izuku opened his eyes. Deku? Uraraka was standing in front of him, looking concerned. You okay? Izuku looked at her. He looked at his friends, battered, bruised, but alive. Yeah, Izuku lied. I'm just thinking about the next mission. Take a break, hero, Bakugo said, throwing a towel at Izuku's face. We won. Enjoy it for 5 minutes. Izuku pulled the towel down. He smiled, but the second user's words lingered in his ears. 0 casualties. It was a miracle. And miracles, Izuku knew, were impossible to sustain. Let's go get some food, Izuku said, standing up. I'm starving. As they walked out of the locker room, the TV in the lounge was playing a loop of their victory. The headline read, Hope Returns. But beneath the headline, a scrolling ticker tape read, HPSC announces new restrictions on independent hero activity. The vacuum was filled, but the walls were closing in. The camera flashes were worse than the explosions. Explosions were honest. They had heat, force, and a trajectory you could calculate. You could dodge an explosion. You could counter it. But the strobe light assault of the media scrum was different. It was a suffocating, blinding barrage that promised not physical injury, but something far more insidious, expectation. Izuku Midoriya stood on a raised podium in the hastily reconstructed lobby of the National Diet building. He was in full Vanguard Alpha gear, though his helmet was off, tucked under his left arm. The air conditioning was humming too loudly, or maybe that was just the blood rushing in his ears. To his right stood Director Shigura, looking smug in a charcoal suit that cost more than Izuku's mother's apartment. To his left, the rest of the Vanguard stood in a rigid line. They looked like statues of war. Bakugo scowling at a reporter from Hero News Network, Todoroki staring blankly at a ceiling fixture, Ida standing at perfect parade rest, and Uraraka offering a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. And so, Shigura leaned into the microphone, his voice booming through the hall. The pacification of the Shinjuku sector is complete. The refugee crisis is stabilized. This is the dawn of a new efficacy, a new symbol. Shigura gestured to Izuku. Ladies and gentlemen, the leader of the vanguard. The new symbol of peace, Deku. The room erupted. Deka! Deka! Over here! Is it true you defeated a high-end solo? Are you taking the #1 spot by default? Does the vanguard answer to the Prime Minister? Izuku stepped forward. He felt the phantom weight of one for all buzzing under his skin. He felt the eyes of the second user, sharp and critical, watching from the vestige world. New symbol of peace. The title felt like a shackle. It felt like a theft. That title belonged to a smiling giant who held up the sky. Izuku looked at the reporters, their desperate faces hungry for a savior. They didn't want a team. They wanted a god. They wanted someone to tell them that everything was fine so they could go back to sleep. Izuku's voice caught. He cleared his throat, the modulation of his suit inactive, leaving just his raw, young voice. I appreciate the support. But the victory in Shinjuku wasn't mine. He gestured to the line behind him. It belonged to the unit. The vanguard isn't one person. We are a system. If you want to thank someone, thank Dynamite for the suppression fire. Thank Shoto for the barriers. Thank Ingenium and Uravity for the evacuation. A symbol is just an image. We are the work. The reporters scribbled furiously, but Izuku could see they weren't listening. They were already writing the headlines. DKU, the humble savior. The next All Might has arrived. Bakugo shifted beside him. They don't care, nerd, he muttered, low enough that only Izuku could hear. They just want a poster boy to paste over the cracks in the wall. I know, Izuku whispered back. Smile, Shigura hissed from the side, his lips barely moving. The public needs to see confidence, Midoriya. Give them the smile, Izuku tried. He really did. He thought of his mother. He thought of Eri. He pulled the corners of his mouth up, but it didn't look like All Might's smile. It looked like a grimace of someone holding up a collapsing roof. The noise and the silence. 3 hours later, the contrast was jarring. They were back at UA, in the high-security briefing room designated for the vanguard. The noise of the press conference was gone, replaced by the hum of servers and the scratching of Mei Hatsum's stylus on a tablet. Public approval for the vanguard is at 88%, Momo Yayorozu reported, scrolling through data streams on the main monitor. Merchandise sales, unauthorized, mostly, are spiking. There are already knockoff green hoodies selling out in Shibuya. Great, Bakugo scoffed, kicking his feet up onto the table. More targets on our backs. It creates a tactical issue, Ida noted, his brow furrowed. If the public perceives Midoriya as the sole point of failure, villains will adjust their strategies. They will seek to isolate him. We saw hints of it in Shinjuku. Let them try, Todoroki said, sipping a pouch of nutrient jelly. Midoriya isn't easy to isolate. Izuku sat at the head of the table, but he wasn't looking at the data. He was looking at a specific report on a secondary screen. It was a police file, flagged with a black clearance marker. Have you guys seen this? Izuku asked. The room quieted. The disappearance in Roppongi? Uraraka asked, leaning over his shoulder. Pro Hero Glint, Izuku read. Ranked 45th before the collapse. He was trying to re-establish an agency in the entertainment district. He was doing a live stream patrol 2 nights ago. And? Bakugo asked. And the stream didn't cut out, Izuku said. It just went empty. The camera was still rolling, but there was no sound. No image. Just black. When the police arrived at the GPS coordinates, Glint was there, physically unharmed. So he's fine? He's catatonic, Izuku said grimly. The doctors say his brain activity is normal, but he won't respond to light, sound, or touch. He's trapped in his own head, and on the wall behind him, someone had spray-painted a symbol. Izuku tapped the screen. The image enlarged. It was a simple, jagged circle with a line through it. A mute button. The silence, Todoroki read the tag. New group? Intelligence is thin, Momo said, typing rapidly. Rumors on the dark web speak of a leader named Void. They say he doesn't want territory or money. He hates noise. Noise? Bakugo raised an eyebrow. The noise of Hero Society, Izuku interpreted, a chill running down his spine. Danger Sense gave a low, throbbing warning, not of immediate threat, but of looming dread. The shouting, the branding, the speeches. The ego. Sounds like a critic, Bakugo grunted. Just another lunatic with a quirk. Maybe. Izuku stood up. But Glint was loud. He was flashy. He was trying to be a celebrity in a war zone. And now he's a vegetable. Izuku looked at the headlines scrolling on the other monitor. The new symbol of peace. We're the loudest things in Japan right now, Izuku said softly. The old pillar. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the UA campus. The construction drones were powering down for the evening, leaving the skeleton of the new Japan suspended in twilight. Izuku walked alone toward the faculty rehabilitation wing. He needed to talk to the only person who understood what it meant to be a symbol. He found Tashinori Yagi in the greenhouse. The former number 1 hero was sitting on a bench, a watering can in his skeletal hand, tending to a bed of fragile white lilies. He looked smaller than Izuku remembered. The retirement and the injuries had carved him down to the bone, leaving only the spirit and the sharp blue eyes. Young Midoriya, All Might smiled as Izuku entered. I saw the press conference. You looked uncomfortable. That obvious? Izuku sat on the bench opposite him. You have a terrible poker face, my boy. Always have. All Might set the watering can down. Shigura is pushing you hard. He wants the comfort of the past. He wants an All Might. I can't be you, Izuku said, staring at his scarred hands. I tried. Early on. I tried to smile like you, to laugh like you. But the world is different now. The smile doesn't reassure them the way it used to. It just reminds them of what they lost. Good, All Might said. Izuku looked up, surprised. Good? If you tried to be me, you would fail, All Might said, his voice raspy but firm. I was a pillar, Izuku. A single, massive pillar holding up the roof of a crumbling temple. It was majestic, yes, but it was flawed. Because when a single pillar cracks, the whole roof comes down. All Might leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. That is what happened. I fell, and society fell with me. We cannot make that mistake again. I know, Izuku said. That's why I formed the vanguard. To share the load. But, I'm terrified, Izuku whispered. The confession hung in the humid air of the greenhouse. When we were fighting in Shinjuku, I was coordinating everything. I could feel the danger before it happened. I was moving them like chess pieces. Bakugo, go left. Shoto, shield right. And they listened. They trusted me instantly. Izuku gripped his knees. But what if I'm wrong? What if I miss a signal? What if I send Uraraka into a trap I didn't see? Being a solo hero, if I die, I die. I accepted that a long time ago. But being a leader? If I mess up, they die. And I don't think I can carry that, All Might. I don't think One for All gave me the strength for that. All Might looked at his successor with infinite sadness and pride. He reached out and placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. The burden of power is heavy, All Might said. But the burden of leadership is crushing. You are right to be afraid. Fear keeps you sharp. The moment you stop fearing for their lives is the moment you start treating them like soldiers instead of friends. But how do I deal with it? Izuku asked, his eyes wet. How do I look Bakugo in the eye and order him to hold a line that might kill him? You don't order him, All Might said. You ask him. And you trust him to say yes. All Might coughed, a wet, rattling sound, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. There is a villain rising, isn't there? I can see the shadow in your eyes. They call themselves the Silence, Izuku said. They target heroes who seek fame. All Might let out a dry chuckle. Irony. The world clamors for a loud savior, and the darkness seeks to silence him. Listen to me, Izuku. The new symbol isn't you. It's the bond. The connection. That is what All for One couldn't understand. That is what this void will hate the most. Don't try to outshout the silence. Harmony is stronger than noise. Izuku stood up. The fear wasn't gone, it never would be, but it felt manageable. It wasn't a wall anymore. It was a weight he could lift. Harmony, Izuku repeated. Go, All Might shoot him away gently. Your team is waiting. And Izuku? Yes? I am very proud of you. Not the symbol. You, the trap. 2 days later, the Vanguard received a priority dispatch. It was midnight. The rain had returned, slicking the neon-lit ruins of the Shibuya crossing. The dispatch didn't come from the HPSC. It came from a distress beacon registered to a freelance hero group operating in the sector. Signal origin is the 109 building, Ida announced from the pilot's seat of the Icarus II. We have multiple hero signatures. Vitals are dropping. Is it a raid? Uraraka asked, checking her grapple lines. No audio, Ida said, tapping his headset. The distress channel is open, but there's no screaming. No combat sounds. Just static. Izuku felt it. Danger sense was a cold, sliding sensation at the base of his skull. It wasn't the sharp spike of a physical attack. It was the feeling of walking into a grave. We go in quiet, Izuku ordered, pulling on his cowl. The green lenses flared. Stealth mode. No sirens. Hatsum installed the dampeners on your boots. Use them. The Vanguard dropped onto the roof of the adjacent building. They moved like ghosts, leaping across the gap to the 109 building. The famous department store was a hollow shell. The windows were blown out. Inside, the emergency lights cast long, flickering shadows. Thermal is erratic, Bakugo whispered, scanning the room with his HUD. I see bodies. 3rd floor. They descended through the atrium. The silence was unnatural. In a city of millions, even in ruins, there was always noise, distant sirens, wind, the hum of the grid. Here, the sound seemed to be sucked out of the air. On the 3rd floor, they found them, 3 heroes. They were local vigilantes who had been deputized. They were standing in the middle of a clothing department, surrounded by mannequins. They weren't dead. They were standing perfectly still, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Their mouths were open as if to scream, but no sound came out. Status? Izuku whispered, moving to the nearest one. He waved his hand in front of the hero's face. No reaction. Pulse is steady, Todoroki said, checking another. Pupils are dilated. It's like glint. They're gone. This is a trap, Bakugo hissed. It's too clean. Danger. The sensation hit Izuku so hard he staggered. It wasn't directional. It was everywhere. Defensive circle. Izuku yelled. The Vanguard snapped into formation, backs to each other, facing outward. Welcome, a voice echoed. It didn't come from speakers. It seemed to vibrate directly in their skulls. To the quiet, from the shadows of the clothing racks, figures emerged. They wore sleek, matte black suits that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were covered by smooth, featureless masks. There were dozens of them, and in the center, floating a few inches off the ground, was a man in a cloak that looked like woven darkness. He wore a mask that was a void, a black hole where a face should be. I am void, the figure said. His voice was soft, melodic, and terrifying. And you are so very loud. Identify yourself and surrender. Ida shouted, his engines revving. You are in violation of the Peacekeeping Act. Peacekeeping, Void mused. You think peace is law? You think peace is orders shouted over a radio? No. Peace is the absence of conflict. The absence of ego. The absence of you. Void raised a hand. Midoriya, Bakugo warned, palms crackling. He's charging something. I can't read the energy signature. Vanguard, scatter! Izuku ordered. They broke formation just as Void clenched his fist. The world went wrong. It wasn't an explosion. It was an implosion of sensory data. For a split second, the sound of Ida's engines vanished. The light from Todoroki's fire flickered out. The floor beneath them seemed to dissolve. Izuku rolled, activating Black Whip to catch a pillar. His vision swam. He's messing with our perception. Izuku shouted into the comms. Don't trust your eyes. I can't hear you. Uraraka's voice came over the channel, panicked. My audio is dead, switching to haptic feedback. Izuku tapped his gauntlet. He sent a rhythmic pulse signal to the team, regroup. North. But the Void soldiers were moving. They were fast, silent assassins. They lunged at the disoriented heroes. Bakugo fired a blast, but his aim was off. He stumbled, clutching his head. Get out of my head! Izuku saw a soldier lunging for Uraraka, who was flailing, trying to find gravity in a world that felt weightless. Smash! Izuku used gearshift. He accelerated instantly, intercepting the soldier and slamming him into a wall. But as he made contact, he felt nothing. No impact. No resistance. An illusion? You fight phantoms, Void's voice purred. You fight your own need to be heroes. Izuku landed, breathing hard. He closed his eyes. If his senses were being hacked, he couldn't use them. Danger sense. It was the one thing Void couldn't touch. It wasn't a physical sense. It was a quirk, a connection to the very concept of threat. Izuku focused on the stinging buzzing in his head. It painted a map of the room in red lines of intent. Real enemy at 3 o'clock. Real enemy at 9 o'clock. Void is at 12 o'clock, preparing another wave. Protocol Gamma. Izuku broadcasted via the text HUD. Eyes closed. Follow my link. The team hesitated for a fraction of a second, then obeyed. They squeezed their eyes shut. Shoto. 30 degrees right. Wall of flame. Todoroki fired blindly. The scream of a hidden soldier confirmed the hit. Bakugo. 90 degrees left. AP shot. Bakugo fired. Boom. Another hit. Ida. Grab Uraraka. Extraction route Alpha. Go. I cannot leave you. Ida signaled back. I'm right behind you. Move. They moved. Guided by Izuku's voice and the data link, they fought their way through the sensory nightmare. They smashed through the window, tumbling out into the rainy night air of Shibuya. As they fell, Uraraka tapped them all, making them float, and Ida activated his boosters to catch them. They landed on the adjacent roof, gasping for air. The sensory deprivation faded. The sound of the rain returned. What the hell was that? Bakugo panted, wiping sweat from his eyes. I couldn't tell up from down. That was the silence, Izuku said, staring back at the dark hole of the 109 building. He can hijack the nervous system. We need to go back, Todoroki said, standing up. We can't leave him. We can't fight him like this, Izuku said, clutching his arm. We barely escaped. If we stay, we become like lint. We need data. We need a countermeasure. Suddenly, the giant screens of Shibuya Crossing, the ones that had been dark since the war, flickered to life. Look, Uraraka pointed. The broadcast. The screens were static at first. Then, the image resolved. It wasn't Void's face. It was the Vanguard. It was footage from the fight they had just fled. But it was edited. It showed Bakugo firing wildly. It showed Ida stumbling. It showed Izuku swinging at empty air. It made them look incompetent. Dangerous. Mad. Then, the image shifted to a black background with the white mute symbol. Void's voice boomed across the entire district, echoing off the skyscrapers. Citizens of Japan. You have been sold a lie. The camera cut to a live feed of the unconscious heroes in the department store. They call themselves the Vanguard. They call themselves the new symbol. But look at them. They are children playing war. They bring noise. They bring fire. They bring destruction. The screen shifted again. It showed documents, leaked HPSC files. The Hero Commission drafted them. They are soldiers of the state. They do not save you because they love you. They save you because they are ordered to. They are a brand. A logo to sell you false security. Izuku watched, horror dawning on him. Void wasn't just attacking them physically. He was dismantling their legitimacy. I offer a different path, Void continued. The path of silence. No more heroes. No more villains. No more quirks used for vanity. Only the peace of the Void. If you want true safety, reject the Vanguard. Reject the noise. If you do not, the screen showed the refugee camps. Then the noise will consume you. I will bring the silence to every home, every shelter, every heart. Starting with the symbol itself, the screens went black. A heavy silence fell over Shibuya. Izuku felt the gaze of his team. They weren't looking at him with doubt, but with realization. He's declared war on us, Bakugo said quietly. Not on society. On us specifically. He wants to break the trust, Momo said over the comms, her voice shaking. Midoriya, the HPSC lines are lighting up. The public is panicking. They think you lost control in there. Izuku looked at the black screens. He remembered All Might's words. A pillar stands alone. Void was trying to isolate them. He was trying to make the public fear the very people sent to save them. Izuku clenched his fist. The green lightning of One for All crackled around his arm, illuminating the rain. He thinks we're just noise, Izuku said, his voice hard. He thinks we're just a brand. He turned to his team. Let's prove him wrong. We aren't going to outshout him. We're going to endure him. What are the orders, boss? Bakugo asked. Izuku looked at the city, now filled with fear again. We go back to base. We analyze the footage. We find his weakness. And then, Izuku pulled his cowl back up. The metallic click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. We turn the lights back on.